Federation.
Mr. President, I would like to very warmly thank our Western colleagues for convening this Security Council meeting on Ukraine, because a huge corruption scandal has just erupted there. It involves top officials of the Kiev regime. For us, this comes as no surprise. At almost every meeting, we have told you that you are dealing with a thieving, corrupt pack profiting from war with your money. It was not even a secret that fell open. It was so obvious that only the blind could fail to notice it. And here one is tempted to ask a question from a well-known skit which would be familiar to Russian and Ukrainian audiences. Question, where's the money? Answer, what money? On the 10th of November, the Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau, after a series of searches, reported uncovering large-scale embezzlement at Energoatom, which is the operator of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. According to the investigation, the organizer and the main beneficiary of the illegal enrichment scheme was Timur Mindic, Zelensky's longtime associate. NABU says that in just 1 year, members of this criminal network laundered about $100 million in kickbacks. And the same corruption scheme operated in the defense sector. The true scale of this scandal is something that we can only guess at right now, but here's just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't heard anyone at this meeting say a word about that. Meanwhile, Zelensky continues to tour European cities, begging for money and weapons to spend it for his own benefit and that of his inner circle. But Europe has no money left for Ukraine. Europe needs to rearm its own armies to prepare, as they hysterically claim, be ready for war with Russia by 2030. And where will they get money for Ukraine? Well, they can be stolen by stealing Russia's sovereign assets, for example. But this hasn't worked so far. So they resort to whipping up anti-Russian hysteria to scare and unsettle impressionable Europeans. For example, with alleged Russian drones entering airspace, the UK Defence Secretary John Healey dispatched British fighters and a frigate to monitor the Russian oceanographic vessel called Yantar. No sooner had an incident occurred with damaged railway tracks in Poland committed, according to the Polish authorities themselves, by 2 Ukrainians, than Warsaw declared, clearly without showing any evidence of the fact that the trail leads to Russia, because it was an act of state terrorism carried out by Ukrainians working for Russian intelligence. And the speed of arriving at such conclusions by Polish authorities is truly astounding. We, after all, remember well who was the first to thank the United States in the Biden administration for the Nord Stream terrorist attack. It was Poland's current foreign minister, Sikorski. Now, on the ground situation, the position of Ukraine's armed forces remains dire, not to say catastrophic. Russian troops are successfully advancing on almost all fronts, essentially. According to Russia's Ministry of Defense, in the past week, several towns and villages in Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporozhye regions was liberated, and in the DPR. Ukrainian military equipment, including Neptune launchers and U.S.-made HIMARS systems, are being systematically destroyed, including command posts of the Ukrainian army, fortifications, armored vehicles, ammunition depots, and drone control centers. Supply lines are also being disrupted. Ukrainian units continue to suffer heavy losses and rapidly lose fighting capability. Ukrainian forces are stymied in major strategic hubs such as Krasnoarmeysk, which is formerly Pokrovsk in Dmitrov, and Kupiansk. Kupiansk has been liberated. Kiev denies this, citing Russian propaganda. In late October, President Putin proposed granting unhindered access there for foreign journalists, including Ukrainian ones, to make sure that they can see firsthand what the situation is. Russian command was ready to suspend hostilities for 5 to 6 hours to create safe corridors for the press, but Kiev, of course, refused. And leading Western media and journalist associations also remained silent. Indeed, why would you want to learn the truth that would shatter Zelensky's carefully spread myths about Ukraine's invincible army? Ukrainian failures are accompanied by very brutal actions against civilians, which remain in contested cities. Nationalists call them żdun, those who are waiting. Those who want to stay and then later move to the Russian side. On the 14th of November, 7 civilians killed in the DPR by targeted Ukrainian drone and mortar attacks were trying to evacuate the local priest, his wife, and parish families as they were trying to evacuate. They were methodically hunted down, and then the villagers were prevented from retrieving and burying the bodies as drones continued hunting for them. The fact that Ukrainian forces use civilians as human shields, place command posts in private homes, deploy air defenses in residential areas, conduct military operations in densely populated cities is something that's also being confirmed by foreign journalists now, who can hardly be suspected of being pro-Russian. But deliberate killing of isolated civilians fleeing combat zones is beyond evil, let alone humanitarian law. Between 20th October and 16th of November of this year, 307 Russian civilians were harmed by Ukrainian shelling. 260 people were wounded, including 20 minors, and 47 were killed, and this includes 2 children. Overall, civilian targets in Russian territory during this period received at the very least 13,195 munition rounds. Villages in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, and Moscow regions were harmed, as well as Saratov, Novorossiysk, and Volgograd were hit. But the UN Secretary General and his spokesperson show neither courage to speak about this nor words to express sympathy for the victims. But they very readily strongly condemn any Russian strikes based on any information, be it verified or not verified, provided to them by the UN resident coordinator in Ukraine, Shmale. We're not at war with Ukrainian civilians. Our forces act with maximum responsibility, striking only military targets, and they're supporting transport, energy infrastructure of Ukraine. According to leaked military documents, Ukraine's armed forces have lost more than 1.7 million troops since the start of the special operation. And this year alone, as of August, that figure was more than 600,000. Massive, irrecoverable losses are indirectly confirmed by body exchanges. When we return thousands of Ukrainian soldiers' remains and only receive about 20-30 bodies in return. It is very clear that Ukrainian troops under these conditions are fleeing en masse. In October alone, the record 21,000 soldiers deserted, which is the equivalent of 4 brigades. To replenish the
Для восполнения потерь ведется беспрецедентная по уровню насилия мобилизация. В ход идут закрытие границ, блокировка банковских счетов, приостановка водительских прав и просто отлов людей на улицах. И хотя украинские пропагандисты и тут пытаются свалить все на российские фейки, международные СМИ не смогли проигнорировать неожиданное, но очень красноречивое доказательство. В начале ноября Украину с визитом посетила Анджелина Джоли. Ее охранника задержали прямо у нее на глазах и доставили для проверки в призывной пункт. Всего за пару недель до этого инцидента таким же образом был мобилизован украинский журналист, работающий с британскими корреспондентами из издания «Сан». На этом фоне продолжает обсуждаться снижение возраста для обязательной мобилизации с 25 до 22 лет. 12 ноября мэр Киева Виталий Кличко озвучил эту инициативу в интервью изданию «Политика». Так дело скоро дойдет и до Гитлер-Югенда. Господин председатель, несмотря на окружение значительного количества украинских войск, колоссальные потери, насильственную мобилизацию, угрозы для мирного населения, главарь киевского режима запрещает признавать утрату городов, отдает приказы об удержании позиций до последнего бойца, запрещает отступать. Такая линия украинского руководства не имеет никакого отношения к военной реальности и носит чисто политический характер. Зеленский хочет показать западным спонсорам, что фронт держится с расчетом на продолжение финансирования войны с Россией. Ему нужны миллиарды долларов для того, чтобы война продолжалась, в том числе для обогащения его и его признаков, и сохранялись основания для того, чтобы оставаться у власти. При этом со стороны Киева мы слышим отчаянные призывы о прекращении огня. Это же мы слышим и от европейских подельников Зеленского. Цена этим призывам нам очевидна. Так называемое немедленное и скорейшее прекращение огня необходимо им лишь для того, чтобы терпящие поражение за поражением ВСУ получили долгожданную передышку. Что же касается лицемерных призывов наших бывших европейских партнеров к миру, то режим Зеленского и его кураторы не нацелены на них, а эскалация противостояния в их интересах. Еще на прошлой неделе первый замминотдела Украины, хорошо знакомый вам Кислица, прямо сказал, что Киев официально приостановил мирные переговоры с Москвой. Фактически еще летом украинская делегация перестала реагировать на предложения России, в том числе касающиеся создания рабочих групп по политическим, гуманитарным и военным вопросам. Что же касается нынешних заявлений Зеленского из Стамбула и европейских столиц, то это не что иное, как попытка отвлечь внимание от чудовищного коррупционного скандала. Мы с самого первого дня ясно заявили о целях спецоперации. Неблоковая Украина, ее денацификация, прекращение гонений на все русское, соблюдение прав всех живущих там граждан. Однако подлинного желания Киева сесть за стол переговоров для того, чтобы обсудить ключевые аспекты решения украинского кризиса, мы не видим. Господин председатель, хотели бы в заключение в очередной раз зафиксировать наше принципиальное несогласие с приглашением на сегодняшнее заседание делегаций столь большого числа стран по правилам 37 и 39. Их, помимо Украины, набралось целых 7, и все они целых 6, и все они являются членами либо союзниками НАТО и ЕС. Руководствуется сугубо блоковой дисциплиной, абсолютно никакой добавленной стоимости дискуссии не привносит. Каждый раз эти делегации тратят ценное время Совета, зачитывая, по сути, одни и те же заезженные тезисы, к тому же практически копирующие выступления представителей Евросоюза. Мы категорически против превращения заседаний Совета Безопасности в ток-шоу с целью под камерой отработать методичку для своей внутренней аудитории. Считаем, что такой подход подрывает авторитет Совета. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Director Goto, Director Wasornu, for your briefings today. Colleagues, we have yet another winter approaching, Ukraine's fourth, since Russia launched its invasion. And it is imperative to end this war and begin the process of rebuilding. Colleagues, diplomacy is the only path to a durable and just peace. The United States has invested at the highest levels, the President of the United States personally, to end this war. We have proposed generous terms for Russia, including sanctions relief. We have asked Russia to halt its attacks and meet directly with Ukraine to negotiate a peaceful settlement. Unfortunately, the fighting continues, tragically causing more civilian casualties. And we've also seen incursions now into the airspace of third countries, including of our NATO allies, actions that risk widening this conflict even further. Ukraine's counterattacks, in turn, have hit Russia's energy sector, while also causing more civilian casualties. And we've also seen incursions now into the airspace of third countries, including of our NATO allies, actions that risk widening this conflict even further. Ukraine's counterattacks, in turn, have hit Russia's energy sector, and other critical infrastructure, further constraining Russia's ability to fuel its war economy. And Russia has now suffered more than 1 million casualties. It has endured severe international sanctions. Colleagues, the bottom line is the costs to all sides have been devastating, and it is beyond time for this war to end. And I would hope that we would all agree that this war will not end militarily. Russia's and Ukraine's leaders must negotiate. Both Russia and Ukraine must accept a ceasefire. Further, the U.S., from the international community standpoint, the U.S. has called on all countries, particularly those in Europe, to stop buying energy resources from Russia. And we have imposed additional sanctions on Russia's 2 largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. We did so on October 22nd. We can impose further economic costs if Russia continues to ignore calls for a ceasefire. We will also continue to make weapons available for Ukraine's defense. Colleagues, finally, we cannot let this meeting pass without calling for the return of the kidnapped and missing children from Ukraine, for the resolution of that issue. And colleagues, under President Trump's leadership, the United States will continue to pursue a path to peace in Ukraine. We ask all UN member states to join us in supporting these efforts, calling for a ceasefire, and ending this war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
السيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أتقدم بالشكر إلى السيدة كايوكو غوتو والسيدة إيدي موسورنو على إحاطتهما القيمتين. السيد الرئيس، تعكس التطورات الراهنة التي يعرفها الصراع الروسي الأوكراني مشهدا آخر من التصعيد، وذلك على وقع الاشتباكات العسكرية المتبادلة التي لا تزال تشكل يوما بعد يوم خطرا داهما على السلم والأمن الدوليين. وإذ تعرب بلادي عن قلقها جراء احتدام الصراع واستمرار الهجمات العسكرية بين الطرفين، لا سيما باستخدام الصواريخ والمسيرات، فإنها تعتبر أن إطالة أمد هذا الصراع لن يترتب عنه سوى تدهور للوضع الإنساني وسقوط لمزيد من الضحايا المدنيين بما فيهم النساء والأطفال والشيوخ، وإلحاقه لأضرار مدمرة بالبنى التحتية الأساسية، لا سيما ونحن على مشارف فصل الشتاء. وما يبعث للقلق أيضا هو استمرار منطق التصعيد بين الطرفين على الرغم من مبادرات الوساطة التي قد شهدناها، والتي كانت تهدف إلى التخفيف من حدة الصراع وتقريب وجهات النظر وإحراز بعض التقدم في مسار البحث عن حل سياسي سلمي قد يرضي الطرفين ويضع حلا لهذه الحرب. وفي هذا الصدد يود وفد بلادي التأكيد على النقاط التالية. أولا، تجدد الجزائر دعوتها لوضع حد نهائي للمواجهات بين الطرفين، كما تجدد إدانتها لانتهاكات القانون الدولي، وتدعو الطرفين للالتزام بقواعده بما فيها أحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني والحد من تدهور الأوضاع الإنسانية وضمان حماية المدنيين العزل، وكذا البنى التحتية المدنية والحيوية. ثانيا، تحث بلاد الجانبين الروسي والأوكراني للتمسك بروح الحوار والتفاوض كأولوية قصوى وخيار أمثل وفعال لتهدئة الأوضاع ولتطوير تفاهمات مشتركة، عوضا عن اللجوء إلى التصعيد والاحتدام اللذان لن يفضيا إلا لتعزيز الهواجس الأمنية وتقويض السلم والأمن الدوليين. ثالثا، تشجع الجزائر الطرفين على تجديد انخراطهما البناء وبحسن نية في المفاوضات المباشرة وتكثيف الجهود الدبلوماسية لإحياء المسار السلمي للنزاع بشكل مستمر ودائم. وندعو في هذا الإطار لتعزيز المشاورات من أجل استئناف عمليات تبادل الأسرى والإفراج عن المحتجزين، بغية تعزيز المساعي التوافقية وتمهيد الطريق نحو تثمين العمل المشترك لحل هذا النزاع. رابعا، نجدد دعوتنا كذلك للمجتمع الدولي للإسهام بشكل بناء بعيدا عن الاستقطاب والتجاذبات الجيوسياسية، وذلك لتقليص التباينات بين الطرفين وتجنب التصعيد العسكري بهدف تسهيل فرص الوصول إلى تسوية وحل عادل ودائم بين الطرفين. وفي الختام، تبقى الجزائر ملتزمة في دعم أي جهود دولية ترمي إلى إيجاد حل سياسي عادل ودائم يقوم على مبادئ ومقاصد ميثاق الأمم المتحدة ويراعي الشواغل الأمنية المشروعة للطرفين. وشكرا.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Sierra Leone. Colleagues, Sierra Leone notes the imperative of lasting peace and stability in Ukraine and the wider European region. This meeting must therefore support the path to peace through dialogue. I thank Officer in Charge Kayoko Goto and Director Edem Wosono for their briefings. As the Russian-Ukraine conflict enters its 1,365th day, the civilian population continues to suffer. The United Nations monitoring mission in Ukraine has reported that civilian casualties from January to October 2025 has been significantly higher than the same period last year, with at least 14,500 civilians in Ukraine killed since February 2022. It is way past time for the conflict parties to engage in diplomatic dialogue to seek a cessation of hostilities and work towards a political solution to end the conflict. As we have heard from our briefers today, the intensified use of long-range missiles and drones in heavily populated areas of Ukraine continues to result in fatalities and injuries for civilians, including children. The drone attack on a kindergarten in Kharkiv last month, which resulted in 1 death and over 9 injuries, and for which we can only hope the innocent children who had to be evacuated to shelters can recover, is emblematic of the dire impact of this conflict. The horrors of war faced by millions of children in Ukraine, as well as in Russia, should serve as an impetus for the conflict parties to respond to continuous call for an immediate ceasefire and a lasting peace through dialogue by the members of the Council. Sierra Leone is particularly concerned that as fighting continues for a 4th winter of sub-zero temperatures, the people of Ukraine face heightened risk of death and suffering. The deliberate targeting of energy infrastructure in this conflict has resulted in widespread destruction of the country's power grid, which is reportedly operating at 1/3 of its generation and transmission capacity. Increased power outages and prolonged disruption of heating, electricity, and water supply further endanger the lives of the elderly, disabled, and millions of displaced persons, deepening the humanitarian crisis. Attacks and damage to energy facilities have further disrupted learning for the millions of children in Ukraine who are enrolled in online learning. The targeted attack on civilians and civilian infrastructure that have characterized this conflict as serious violations of international humanitarian law. Military operations around nuclear sites and other critical energy infrastructure are unacceptable and contrary to IHL. So it reiterates its call for the parties to the conflict to respect international law, in particular international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Civilians must be protected from harm, including by taking necessary precautions to spare them from military attacks. In this regard, we urge the parties to the conflict to refrain from operating in and around civilian infrastructure, including deliberate targeting of energy, water, sanitation systems which are essential to life. Noting the warning from OCHA and other humanitarian organizations that this coming winter will be particularly difficult for people in Ukraine, faced with soaring prices, job losses, and little or no income and savings in a wartime economy. So it calls for urgent and increased support for the humanitarian response plan, including the winterization aid plans that provide cash assistance, food, water, medicine, and essential vital supplies to millions of people. Colleagues, the Security Council has to ensure the implementation of Resolution 2774. After almost 4 years of fighting, it is clear that this conflict will not address the legitimate concerns of the parties without negotiations. We therefore reiterate our call for the parties to the conflict to engage in good faith diplomatic dialogue towards an immediate cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire as the first step to an agreement for lasting peace in line with Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. We reiterate our call for the respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and as well the legitimate concerns of all parties to be addressed. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. And now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank Sierra Leone Presidency for convening today's meeting. We are also grateful to the briefers from DPPA, Ms. Kayoko Goto, and OCHA, Ms. Adam Vosorno, for their comprehensive and principled presentations. Thank you to Council members for the decisive, strong statements, despite the propaganda and manipulation and lies that come from behind the nameplate Russian Federation. Since the Council last met on Ukraine in September, the security situation in my country has worsened dramatically. As we heard from the briefers, the Russian Federation has unleashed an even more brutal campaign of terror against civilians, relentless daily missile and drone attacks. Yesterday marked yet another dark chapter in this war, one that will forever stand as a testament to Russia's vicious brutality and disregard for human life. Russian drones and missiles deliberately targeted residential buildings, the very place where people should feel safest. This latest strike involved 48 missiles, an enormous barrage, and 476 attack drones. In the city of Ternopil, a deliberate direct hit by a Russian missile has destroyed a 9-story residential building. This is what Russian attacks on military objects mean. As of today's morning, 28 people, including 3 children, have been confirmed killed and 94 injured, including 18 children. 16 people still remain missing. This is the reality Ukraine is forced to confront every single day. Attacks against children, women and elderly, families in their homes, patients in their hospitals, and teachers and students in schools. Deliberate attacks on civilian infrastructure, energy facilities, and power grids. Deliberate attacks, dozens of cities, hundreds of towns, and thousands of villages razed to the ground. Millions of people left without heat, light, or water during the harsh winter season. And as a result of the attack by Russia, which took place during this very meeting, at least 5 have been killed and 3 more wounded in Zaporizhia. The human toll is devastating and the destruction unimaginable. This is a systematic and deliberate policy aimed at annihilating the Ukrainian people, culture, identity, historical heritage, and our right to exist as a free and dignified nation. This is an attempt to freeze, silence, and extinguish Ukrainian resilience. This is a state terror and genocide. Mr. President, Russia's relentless escalation is not only a military assault, but also a blatant renunciation of peace itself. Every missile it launches is a statement that Moscow prefers escalation over dialogue. From the very first seconds of Russia's invasion, Ukraine has sought peace, and we support all substantive proposals capable for bringing genuine peace to get closer. Since the beginning of this year, Ukraine has supported President Trump's proposals aimed at ending the war. We are ready as before to work constructively with the American side as well as with our European partners and around the world so that the outcome is peace. Ukraine has officially received from the American side a draft plan. We outlined the fundamental principles that matter to our people. We agree to work on the plan's provisions in a way that would bring about a just end of the war. In this context, allow me to make several critical points. First, While Ukraine stands ready to engage in meaningful negotiations to end this war, including at the leaders' level, our red lines are clear and unwavering. There will never be any recognition, formal or otherwise, of Ukrainian territory temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation as Russian. Our land is not for sale. Ukraine will not accept any limits on its right to self-defense or on the size and capabilities of our armed forces. Nor will we tolerate any infringement on our sovereignty, including our sovereign right to choose the alliances we want to join. Any genuine peace process must respect a fundamental principle: nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and nothing about Europe without Europe. And let me be equally clear, we will not reward the genocidal intent that underpins Russian aggression by undermining our identity, including our language. Second, support for Ukraine is indispensable. Peace requires strengthened security and sustained financial assistance to Ukraine. Reinforcing Ukraine's defense capabilities is not an escalation. It is the only path to compelling Russia to engage constructively in international peace efforts. In this regard, we express profound gratitude to all partners and allies. This support is an investment in the rules-based international order and global peace. Third, the Kremlin regime will not stop unless it is stopped through unyielding and concerted pressure. There is only one realistic path to ending this war. Russia must be compelled to retreat, economically, politically, and militarily. If we fail to stop Russia now, its aggression will not end with Ukraine. It will continue to export war, occupation, and repression. It will commit more atrocities, torture, inhuman treatment of civilians and prisoners of war, widespread sexual violence, the abduction of children, the destruction of cultural heritage, and environmental devastation. Europe has lived through this before, and we must not dare forget those lessons. History will be a merciless judge if Russia is eventually rewarded of its war of aggression instead of held accountable. Fourth, the end of the war and the role of this Council. Ukraine has repeatedly called on this Council to adopt a resolution demanding a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. Our people deserve to feel free and protected. A ceasefire is an essential prerequisite for meaningful negotiations. It is the first step toward halting Russia's war of aggression and creating space for diplomacy. We reiterate our call on the Council members to adopt a resolution demanding a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. Mr. President, today the world marks World Children's Day and reaffirms that every child has the inherent right to life, to grow up in a safe environment, to preserve their identity, to remain with their family whenever possible, and to enjoy their childhood and future. Yet in Ukraine, Russia's contribution to this global observance is the bodies of Ukrainian children pulled from beneath the rubble. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, almost 700 children were killed. More than 2,000 have been wounded. Tens of thousands have been forcibly transferred and deported. We cannot bring back the children whom this war has already taken. We cannot undo the horrors that Russia has inflicted on Ukrainian boys and girls. But there is one thing we can still do and must do together. We can stop the abduction of Ukrainian children. We can end this crime now before more young lives are stolen, before more families are torn apart. That is why Ukraine has presented to UN member states the draft UNGA resolution, Return of Ukrainian Children. Its message is clear and simple and contains of three key elements. The Russian Federation must ensure the immediate, safe, and unconditional return of all Ukrainian forcibly transferred or deported children. The Russian Federation must cease without delay any further practices of forcible transfer, deportation, separation from families, change of personal status, including citizenship or adoption, and indoctrination of Ukrainian children. The Secretary General is requested to exercise his good offices and take all necessary steps to facilitate the return of Ukrainian children. The vote will take place in early December, and we call on all member states to support this concrete humanitarian initiative. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for the statement. I'll now give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and my own country, Lithuania. We also align ourselves with the statement by the European Union. I sincerely thank the UN briefers for their substantive reports. We are shocked by yet another drone and missile attack on Ukraine yesterday. Russia fired 476 drones and 48 missiles that killed 25 people and in an apartment building in the city of Ternopil, with about 80 others wounded. We reiterate our full support and gratitude to the UNDP resident coordinator Matthias Schmale and his team, as well as UN agencies providing humanitarian assistance across Ukraine in the extremely dangerous environment. The Baltic states strongly condemn Russia's continuous daily attacks on Ukraine, striking and killing civilians, bombing hospitals, schools and kindergartens, targeting energy infrastructure, and triggering more power outages across the country. These are blunt violations of international law. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has verified that in October, at least 148 civilians were killed and 929 injured. The casualty rates continue to increase by 27% compared to last year until November. This reflects a sharp escalation in violence against civilians and critical civilian infrastructure, and is especially worrying with the upcoming winter. Such attacks constitute war crimes and deprive civilians of elementary humanitarian needs and fundamental rights. For 4 years now, Russia is continuing its terror against civilians. The latest report by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine states that Russian authorities have systematically coordinated actions to drive out Ukrainian civilians from their homes in the occupied territories. Russia's military intentionally targets civilians and civilian objects in brutal, as they call, human safari in the frontline areas. Russia also has forcibly conscripted Ukrainians in the territories it occupies, mobilizing high numbers of the residents into the ranks of its armed forces. The Baltic states continue to be particularly alarmed by the continuous forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia and Belarus. We therefore firmly support Ukraine's resolution addressing the situation of Ukrainian children and the urgent need to ensure their safe return. Mr. President, we are equally alarmed by the horrendous treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war amid consistent reports of torture, ill treatment, and summary executions. Such a treatment is a war crime and must be prosecuted accordingly. We are also concerned by the growing number of uses of ammunition containing hazardous chemical against Ukrainian military personnel in violation of Chemical Weapons Convention. Moreover, the attacks on the substations of the nuclear power plants show blatant disregard of nuclear safety and security in Ukraine. In October, due to the Russian strikes, all Ukraine's operating nuclear power plants had to revert to emergency generators. Russia systematically destroys Ukrainian energy infrastructure with the aim of creating unbearable living conditions for the civilian population, particularly during the harsh winter season. We call on the member states and UN institutions to continue their assistance for the maintenance of the critical energy infrastructure of Ukraine. The Baltic states will continue to support Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including supplying the necessary equipment. Mr. President, Russia's aggression is no longer confined to Ukraine's borders and is spilling across Europe. Russian nationals, shadow fleet operators, and other agents are conducting sabotage and engaging in clandestine activities. We recall the recent council meetings on drones in Poland and fighter planes in Estonia. On behalf of my own country, I would like to reiterate the persistent and provocative actions of Russia's ally Belarus, as I have recently written in a letter informing the Security Council. The Baltic states called on the Council members to condemn the ongoing hybrid operations by Russia and its supporter Belarus, as they may lead to the further escalation. These irresponsible and dangerous actions must be ceased immediately. Mr. President, for months, Russia has rejected all calls by the international community to stop its war. 9 months ago, the Security Council, including Russia, adopted a resolution calling for a swift end to the conflict and urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. Already in March, Ukraine committed to an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire. Russia is the only obstacle to peace in Ukraine. Russia can end the war now, stop its military actions, and participate in meaningful negotiations. We reiterate our support to the US President Donald Trump's efforts and his call to begin direct negotiations to end Russia's war once and for all. The Baltic states call on Russia to stop the war immediately, agree to the ceasefire, and start meaningful negotiations. We urge all UN member states to increase pressure on Russia by strengthening the sanctions and by providing greater political, military, and humanitarian support to Ukraine. The Baltic states reaffirm our strong commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and we will continue to provide Ukraine with lasting support to achieve an immediate, comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace in full compliance with international law, including UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Mr. President, let me thank Sierra Leone for convening this meeting and our briefers for their updates and informative briefings. Mr. President, the permanent member of this Council, the Russian Federation, persists in making the travesty of its presumed role as a guardian of international peace and security. More than 1,300 days into a full-scale invasion of its peaceful neighbor, Moscow has now launched one of its fiercest offensives in months. We are witnessing heavy strikes in frontline locations, attacks on residential areas, destruction of critical infrastructure, torture and killing of detainees, and continuous deportation of Ukrainian children. As we all heard today in the interventions, yesterday at least 25 people were killed, including 3 children, in the missile drone attack on the city of Ternopil. Russia carried out this attack against the civilian apartment blocks. They directed missiles and drones into the people's homes. Mr. President, 2 months ago, the Council met at the request of my country, following Russia's violation of the Polish airspace with its drones. Now we are facing another major escalation, of which I would like this Council to be rightly informed against the Russian disinformation. On November 15 to 16, 2 acts of diversion targeting Polish railway infrastructure occurred, including the blowing up of a section of the track on the Warsaw-Lublin route, which is crucially important for the delivery of the aid, including the United Nations assistance, to Ukraine. According to the investigation, these were intentional actions aimed at causing a railway disaster. Many people's lives were put at risk. These were the most serious acts of sabotage against Poland since the beginning of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine. Fortunately, a tragedy was averted, but another line was crossed. These actions are evidence of how Russia is spreading its aggression into other countries in the region. 2 saboteurs were promptly identified as, of course, individuals bearing the Ukrainian passports, but one of them was sentenced already in May 2025 by Ukrainian court of an act of sabotage committed on behalf of the Russian security services. The other one was of Donbas origin. Both fled from Ukraine to Belarus, where they were also went after committing the sabotage operation in Poland. As predicted, the incidents are being followed by the Russian propaganda and disinformation, conduct we witnessed all too often in this chamber also today. Russian media are attempting to portray the sabotage as a Ukrainian provocation. We are closely monitoring the information sphere and Russia's attempts to inflict the damage there, as well as to sow divisions within our own society. Mr. President, all this is happening in defiance of diplomatic initiatives, especially those led by the United States and President Trump, and despite the will of the international community repeatedly expressed here at the UN. Russia has consistently chosen war over peace, destruction over building, and death over life. For self-interest elites in the Kremlin, the massive loss of life, even among Russian soldiers, and the deepening economic crisis at home are of no importance. Moscow shows no interest in halting its unprovoked aggression against Ukraine and even rejects a ceasefire. We will, however, continue to support a just peace in Ukraine, one that is acceptable and supported by Ukraine as a victim of aggression, and in accordance with the principles of international law. We must hold Russia accountable for its actions and deter future wars in our region and beyond. Mr. President, Ukraine's reconstruction will remain our high priority. Poland will host the Ukraine Recovery Conference in 2026, aiming to strengthen the coordination of reconstruction efforts and mobilize the support of all international partners in order to accelerate Ukraine's recovery and modernization. Poland will also continue to support the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, as well as economic sanctions against Russia in order to curb its ability to fuel the war. We call on all peace-loving countries to join in those efforts. Russian authorities must be forced into talks by stronger sanctions and by increasing economic cost of war. The alternative is very grim. The Kremlin's imperialist, neo-colonial demands would in fact deprive Ukraine of its sovereignty and re-establish spheres and will re-establish the spheres of influence. We reject the very idea of such spheres of influence. We cannot allow the aggressor to intimidate the international community. And in this conflict, there is only one and sole aggressor, and that's the Russian Federation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the Presidency for convening this meeting, and thank you to the briefers for their updates. Colleagues, in the 2 months since this Council last convened to address Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the aggressor state has further increased the intensity of its missile and drone strikes, once again throwing aside the calls of members of this Council. It doesn't care. It has, in fact, increased its systematical targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure in clear violation of international law. On Tuesday, Russian attacks reportedly killed at least 25 people, including children, in 2 residential areas in Ternopil. Earlier this week, we learned of an unprecedented act of sabotage involving the blowing up of a railway track in Poland. This incident directly concerns the security of an EU member state and its civilians. The threats to our security are real and growing. After investigations, the sabotage was attributed to individuals previously accused of cooperating with Russia. Russia continues to demonstrate what we have repeatedly warned about in this chamber. Not only that it lacks any real political will to end its aggression and engage in meaningful peace negotiations, but fundamentally that the only real root cause of this war is its desire to recolonize by force 34 years after it regained its independence as sovereign and independent member of these United Nations. Colleagues, the UN, in case we forget, was created to promote decolonization, not recolonization. Russia may want us to forget this, but we won't. While Russia cynically attacks Ukraine's energy sector ahead of a harsh winter, the call for an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire grows even louder. Ukraine demonstrated its readiness months ago. The UN Secretary General reiterated his call yesterday after yet another brutal overnight barrage when he called for a ceasefire, and I quote him, as a first step towards a just, comprehensive and sustainable peace that fully upholds Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, in line with the UN Charter, international law and relevant UN resolutions, unquote. All members of the Security Council repeated this call today. All except one, Russia. We welcome recent statements to this end by many countries from around the world as well. A ceasefire is a first necessary step towards a just and lasting peace. So today, we once again echo this message to Russia. Stop the killing, stop it, and join Ukraine at the negotiating table. There's a shocking truth, dear colleagues, about this war. According to credible reports, more than 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed or injured trying to conquer Ukraine. On many days, more than 1,000 young Russian men and women perish on the battlefield far from their homes. Over 3 years into what it had planned to be, remember, a 3-day war, Russia continues to be countered by the brave Ukrainian soldiers day after day. Colleagues, the European Union will sustain its diplomatic efforts towards peace, together with the United States and other partners. We will continue supporting Ukraine so it can remain in a position of strength with the means to continue exercising its inherent right to self-defense. Before, during, and after any ceasefire, this includes political, financial, humanitarian, military, reconstruction, diplomatic support. And we will further increase our coordinated pressure on Russia until it stops its war. All of us in this room should do that. When the European Union calls to increase pressure on Russia, it is not to prolong the war, but to push for peace, to create incentives for Russia to stop its systematic attacks, which include violations of European airspace, by the way, and to generally sit down for talks. Remember, Russia too committed itself to this by voting in favor of the Path to Peace resolution in February of this year. But then again, Russia may feel little compulsion to comply with Security Council resolutions or any other resolutions of the UN if third countries and actors and entities therein continue enabling Russia's war of aggression. We condemn again the continued military support provided by Iran, by Belarus, and by the DPRK, and we urge all countries, including members of this Council, to immediately cease any direct or indirect assistance to Russia in its war of aggression. And we call on Russia and Belarus to immediately ensure the safe return to Ukraine of all Ukrainian children unlawfully transferred and deported to Russia and Belarus. We fully support Ukraine's initiative to seize the General Assembly of the immediate need to return the Ukrainian children. The international community must do everything in its power to take concrete measures that facilitate that safe return. Colleagues, in closing, I reaffirm our continued and unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. This may sound like an obvious point, but it is one worth repeating in case Russia hopes that the blatant violation of the UN Charter by a permanent member of this Security Council can be normalized so long as it is continued unabated and so long as the aggression gets worse. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Lambrinidis, for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Mr. President, I thank the briefers for their insightful remarks at the beginning, and I